Yud Gimel Elul, this Tuesday night, Wednesday, is the yard site of the legendary Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim ben Rav Eliyahu mi Baghdad. He is one of the few people that his Sfarim are learned throughout Tfusay Sa'aretz. We don't have, even though there are many classic Sfarim, but with very few exceptions, you have that a person's Sefer is Mekabel on all different segments of Klal Yisrael, and it's Kamat learned every day, right? The Sfarim of the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai Halachas, even the Ben Yoyada on Shas, many of these Sfarim are learned on a daily basis. You don't have that many great tzaddikim that was zoicha to this. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was once asked, and he said in a shir, why was the Ben Ish Chai zoicha that his Sfarim were Mekabel, not just in Nigla, even in Nister. There's a famous Sefer Das Tfuna that is accepted as a prerequisite to learn Kabbalah amongst all segments of Klal Yisrael. Hasidish, Ashkenazic, Svardim. His halachas of the Ben Ish Chai is obviously primarily learned by Svardim, but even Ashkenazim learn it. And his Svarim on Musar, his Svarim on Drush, his Svarim on Agadata. The Ben Ish Chai wrote the famous song that we sing on Lag BaOmer, Via Martin Koy L'Choy, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that was written by the Ben Ish Chai. And who sings it? Everybody sings it. Hasidim, Ashkenazim, Yeshivish, not Yeshivish, Svardim, all different backgrounds sing it. So what is the secret, said Rav Mordechai Eliyahu? He said that he heard from an elderly Iraqi Rav that the secret, the Rabbi Yosef Chaim, was the biggest Anav in his generation. There was no great Anav in his generation. He was such an Anav that even though he deserved, as we're going to see, to be the Rav of Baghdad, he refused. Now, being the Rav of Baghdad was basically the chief rabbi of all of the Middle East. Not only that, it brought you in contact with all the great merchants of India, because India and Iraq had a relationship because they were both, to some degree, governed by the British governments. They were, to some degree, colonies of the British government, and there was a lot of business and there was a lot of trade between the two countries. So many of the rich Indian Jews came to Baghdad to do business. So naturally, coming to Baghdad, you would have a connection with the Rav. And even all still, the Ben Ish Chai refused. He said he wanted to sit and learn on his own. He wasn't interested in Kavod, and that gave him, as we said many times with the Beis Yosef, he was the biggest honor of his time. Not only that, until the age of 26, nobody really knew who he was. Other than being the Rav, the son of the great Rav, people didn't realize that he was such a Talmid Chacham. People, with very few exceptions, did not realize that he was this outstanding Gaon, this tremendous Eved Hashem. The Ben Ish Chai was born to his parents, Harav Eliyahu and Rabbanit Mazal Tov, on Chof Zayin of 1835. Now, his parents did not have children right away. And it seems that, as the story goes, that his mother, Rabbanit Mazel, went to the Aber Yaakov. The Aber Yaakov was the great forerunner of the Abu Chotzer family. Everybody knows the Baba Sali. The Baba Sali's father was Rabbi Masud. Rabbi Masud's father was the great Aber Yaakov. Now, the Aber Yaakov lived in Morocco. It seems that at one point he was near or right by the border of Iraq. So at that time, the Ben Ish Chai's mother took advantage and went and waited 3 days to see him. And when she finally saw him, he gave her a bracha that her son will light up the world in Torah and Avodah. Now, even though the Ben Ish Chai, as a young kid, was a very smart and gifted kid, there weren't any major signs that he was this Ilu Shabi Ilui or Yochid B'Dor. That all changed when the Ben Ish Chai was 7 years old, and a event in his life changed the course and the direction that he would take. When he was 7 years old, he was playing with his sister like all siblings do. They were playing outside, and he fell into a pit of water. Now, his sister could not take him out, so by the time she ran to get her mother, who ran to get help and to get a doctor, the Ben Ish Chai passed out. It seems to be that either he drowned, or he was drowning, or the ear caused him to pass out. And when they finally were able to take him out, the doctor told the mother that the chances of him surviving are slim to none. Even still, his parents stayed up the whole night crying and saying Tehillim that the bracha of Rabbi Yaakov should not, chas v'shalom, not be mekoyim, and Hashem should rachmanis. And in the morning, a nes happened, and the Ben Ish Chai woke up. And he said that when he was in the pit and he was feeling that he was near the end, the Ben Ish Chai said that he was makabel upon himself that Hashem saves him, he will dedicate his life to Torah and Avodah. And we're going to see that there was another unfortunate event that had to do with a pit in the life of the Ben Ish Chai. Now, as we mentioned, most people did not really recognize the true value of the Ben Ish Chai. There were a few stories that a little bit showed the tremendous godless who the Ben Ish Chai was. At 16 years old, there was a famous Shaila that came to Baghdad. Now, we know today when you go buy esrogim, you can buy 10, 20 esrogim. Each person, there's plenty of esrogim. There's so many esrogim that at the end of the season, right when Sukkot starts, you can buy thousands of esrogim for $1. But as we know, the stories from Europe and in the Middle East, it was very hard to come by. And that year, it seems to be that there was only one esrog in all of Baghdad. The problem, which is what the Shaila was, that this esrog was bought from a field that was owned by Yisraelim. Now that in and of itself is not a problem. The problem was that one or two of the Yisraelim were ketanim. And ketanim cannot sell and cannot take care of their fields. So Bezdin appoints a guardian, an apitropos. So there's a debate in halacha, is an apitropos a guardian dioraisa, which means when he sells you something on behalf of the ketanim, is it a dioraisa transaction or is it a derabanan transaction? Are they able to sell you what the field, fruits and vegetables and whatever, and in this case it's roigim, because the chachamim, the bezdin appointed him, so it's only the rabbanan transaction. Really minatayra, since the ketanim cannot appoint an agent, he's not really an agent. It's only the chachamim on behalf to take care of the ketanim, they appoint this apitropos, or is it really a diaraisa? What's the nafkamina? What's the difference? The difference is that on Sukkot, the first day, it says in the Torah, lekachtem lochem. Min ha-Torah, you have to do a kinyan. So if the kinyan, this purchase from the Yisraelim, is a diaraisa, you're allowed to make a bracha on the first day of Yom Tov. If it's a dirabanan transaction, because the chachamim appointed this apitropos to be the agent, it's only the Rabbanan transaction, and on the first day of Yom Tov, which is obviously not Shabbos, your obligation is Minat Torah, and you cannot make a bracha. And it seems that the Chacham of Baghdad could not come to a resolution. They came to the Rav, and they said, Rav, you have to paskin, we have to know what to do, because if it's a problem, we're going to have to try and find another esrog. Now we don't, why? Because you don't want, the whole community making a bracha levatala. So the Rav, the Ben Ish Chai's father, Rebbe Elio, said, come to me in the morning and I'll give you an answer. When the Ben Ish Chai, who was 16 years old at that time, heard the Shaila, he stayed up the entire night going through the Sugya from the Gemara in Sukkah, from the Gemaras in Bava Metzia to see what an apitropos is, through the Shulchan Aruch, Reish Tzadik, the Rishonim, whatever relevant and pertinent Achrayim there were. And he came to his father in the morning, and his father said, how can I help you? He said, I have a tshuva, I have an answer to the Shaila, right? There's the famous story that there was a dispute between the Netziv and Reb Chaim regarding an esrog, the kashrus of the esrog. The Netziv, who stayed up all night going through the sugya, sent a message to Reb Chaim, his grandson-in-law, right? The Netziv's daughter married Reb Fol Shapiro. Reb Fol Shapiro's daughter married Reb Chaim. So Reb Chaim Brisk was the grandson-in-law of the Netziv, and he also learned with him in the yeshiva. He was one of the Ramim in Volozhin. And the famous story is that the Netziv sent a messenger to Reb Chaim at 3 in the morning. Reb Chaim came running to Netziv. He didn't know what happened. So the Netziv says, I have the sugya. He saw his grandfather piled up with Sfarim, with Shulchan Aruch and Gemaras and Rishonim. And he says, come, I want to tell you the status of the esrog. So Reb Chaim said, I didn't even make Birchas HaTorah yet. Netziv said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and he didn't say Birchas HaTorah yet. I don't want to talk to you. So here, similar story, that the Ben Ish Chai stayed up all night going through the sugya. So his father said to him, okay, before I learn your tshuva and how you got to the conclusion, what's the conclusion? So the Ben Ish Chai said, I came to the conclusion that it's a Rabbanan transaction, and therefore on the first day of Sukkot, you cannot make a bracha. So his father said, I was thinking the same thing. That's what I was going to rule. Now let me look at your notes. When the Ben Ish Chai's father looked through the tshuva and the notes of the Ben Ish Chai, he was amazed. He says, it's unbelievable. He gave him a kiss on his forehead, and he said, the bracha of the Rabbi Yaakov is Makuyim Baruch Hashem. And when he came to the Rabbanon and he said the psak, he showed them the tshuva, and the Chachamim were floored. They were unbelievable how the clarity and getting to the heart of the problem and the rayas and the proofs to the tshuva. This is a tshuva that's written down. He said, you should know this is not my tshuva, this is my son who's 16 years old. So at that time, some of the Chachamim started to see some of the greatness of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai got married in 1851, so not at an old age. He married his wife Rachel from the famous Somer family. The most famous member of the family was the great Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Abdallah Sameach. In 1859, just 8 years after the Ben Ish Chai was married, at the young age of 26, his father passes away. His father also, unfortunately, was not merited to have a long life. He died at the age of 52. Now, at this point, the people, the Chacham of Baghdad, did not know who to choose as the successor of the Rav. As we mentioned, Rabbi Yosef Chaim was very unassuming. He was a big Anav, and for the most part, he kept to himself. So people didn't fully appreciate his greatness. He rarely spoke. He really gave drashas. He didn't write any svarim at that point, other than corresponding with some of the great Talmid Chacham of his generation, the most famous one being the elderly Zaken, Reb Chaim Falaji in Turkey. Most of the community did not recognize and appreciate who the Ben Ish Chai was. After the Shiva of his father, the community came to the Ben Ish Chai and said, as the Bechor, we're being machabed you to give a drasha, to give a hesped on your father. At that moment, when he walked into the shul, the Rosh Yeshiva saw that most of the people did not get up for him. The Rosh Yeshiva, the elderly Zaken, where most of the great Iraqi Rabbanim of the prior generation, or really two prior generations, Raphaim Cohen. Raphaim Cohen was the father of the great Reb Shalom Cohen, the Rosh Yeshiva of Parat Yosef, who took over after Reb Avadia to lead the Mayetzes of Shas. See, he was a Talmud of Reb Abdallah Sameach. The great Mekubal Reb Shimon Agassi, Reb Salman Mutzafi, whose son is the great Darshan Reb Benziah Mutzafi, Kaduri, and the famous Mekubal also Reb Eliyahu Fataya. These were all Talmidim of Reb Abdallah Sameach. Reb Abdallah Sameach created one of the biggest yeshivas in the Middle East, known as Beis Zulka. This was a famous yeshiva. Reb Avadi is a famous tourist of Reb Avadi Yosef there, and he, seeing the lack of understanding who the Ben Ish Chai was, he got up. Now, obviously, if the elderly Rosh Yeshiva got up, the entire community got up, and the shul that held over 4,000 people. Reb Abdallah Sameach, the Rosh Yeshiva, said and announced that if I was younger, I'd carry the Ben Ish Chai on my shoulder as a sign of the great chashivas of who he was. At that moment, the Ben Ish Chai gave a drasha for 6 hours. It said that now one person of the of the community left. They were so spellbound, and as they say in English, they were licking their fingers from the tremendous drasha and the tremendous talent that the Ben Ish Chai had in speaking, and the great chidushim, that immediately on the spot they offered him to be the chief rabbi of Baghdad. Now, as we mentioned before, being the chief rav of Baghdad was one of the most prestigious positions in all of the Middle East. It's the equivalent of being the rav of Prague or Krakow, the great centers of Pressburg, the great centers in Europe. But the Ben Ish Chai refused. He said he wants to sit and learn. He doesn't need the money because Baruch Hashem, his brothers ran a business and he received money from it. And Memela, he wanted to sit and learn and didn't need the oil of Rabbanos. However, as a compromise, he agreed that 4 times a year on Shabbosim, he would speak Shabbos Agadol, Shabbos Shuva, Shabbos Zohar, and Shabbos Kala, which was before Pesach, to give other halachas. Rabbi Yitzchak Duri said that even though when he spoke on the Shabbosim, there was no microphone, obviously, and there were 4,000 to 5,000 people that came, if you could imagine, in this great shul, every person was able to hear, even the one sitting all the way at the end, as if the Ben Ish Chai was standing in front of him. The story goes that when the Ben Ish Chai's son, Rabbi Yaakov, took over and he spoke, the people who started to say, "We can't hear you. We heard your father perfectly, we can't hear you." So he said, "It's not a chiddush. When my father spoke, he wasn't speaking. The Shekhinah was speaking, so you're able to hear him. I am a regular person," said Rabbi Yaakov. "That's why you can't hear me." Rav Kaduri, who remembered, Rav Kaduri died either at the age of 103 or 110, depending on who you ask. He was 15, 16 when the Ben Ish Chai passed away. He saw the Ben Ish Chai. He said that we all knew when the Ben Ish Chai was coming into the Beis Medrash to speak or to daven, because before him a tremendous aura of light would precede him. That was the simon to everybody. He said everybody saw it. It wasn't just tzaddikim. Everybody saw this light of the Ben Ish Chai, and they knew that he was coming, and they all got up. Now, interestingly, even though the Ben Ish Chai did not accept upon himself being the Rabbanus, he was a big Marbetz Torah. He would learn every day after Shachos with people in the shul, the community. He would make big siyumim in order to be mechabed and to raise the Karen of the Torah, to be mafritz all the different segments of his community. The Ben Ish Chai was a tremendous mechaber sfarim, one of the great prolific writers in the history of Klal Yisrael. Most of his sfarim, as we're going to see, are named after the Ben Yehoyada Ben Yehoyada. This came about in 1869. Rabbi Yosef Chaim went to Eretz Yisrael. The Ben Ish Chai went to Eretz Yisrael. He went to Yerushalayim to visit the Mukubalim there, to answer and to discuss different shalos that he had. He went to Chevron Domus Machpelah, and he went specifically to the Galil and the Miron. Why did he go to the Galil and the Miron? So Miron is obvious. He went to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Over there, he wrote the famous piyut that we mentioned before, Via Martim Kol Achai. But he also wanted to go to the caver of the Ben Yehoyada Ben Yehoyada. When he came to the caver, it's brought down in Kabbalah that somebody who's able to do a yichud and connect als yichud somehow to the neshama of the Ben Yehoyada Ben Yehoyada, secrets of the Torah are revealed to that person. How do you do that? So we know that every tzaddik that dies leaves over what's called a rishimu of his neshama. Rishimu means a trace. Kaviyachol, if you pour grape juice into a plastic cup and after you drink the cup remains red or light red, right? That is the trace, the leftover film of the grape juice. Lahavdil, the film, the leftover trace of the neshama of the tzaddik, it remains by the kaver. That's why when we daven in the schus of the tzaddik, or we ask the tzaddik to be Me'elis Yosher for us, which is the two ways that you can daven by a kaver. You can't ask the tzaddik to be pol for you. You have to either ask in the schus of the tzaddik, or that the tzaddik should daven for you. As the Kava Yosher writes, that without the Mason, we wouldn't be able to live in this world. We need the tefillos of the Mason. That announces to the tzaddik that you're there. Yes, we light a candle, we put a rock on the thing, and obviously during the yard site or different times of the month, the rishimu, the trace, is more noticeable. It's much more stronger. But in general, in order to connect to the neshama, you have to do what's called a yichud. Yichud means taking names of Hashem, specifically to the tzaddik, specifically to be mechaber your neshama. The Ben Ish Chai obviously knew these yichudim. It could be that he asked the tzaddikim in Yerushalayim. It could be that he knew it. And he said from there he got a tremendous connection to the neshama of the Ben Yehoyada. And that's why all the psalm that he wrote had all the names of the Ben Yehoyada. The pasuk goes Ben Yehoyada, Ben Yehoyada, Ben Ish Chai, Rav Pa'olim, Mikaptziel. And if you look the psalm of the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai, there's the Ben Yehoyada, there's the Ben Yehoyada, there's the Rav Pa'olim, there's Mikaptziel. All of these were named after the Ben Yehoyada, Ben Yehoyada. He also wrote other names, Od Yosef Chai, Adaris Eliyahu, different names to honor the fact that he survived the serious crisis that he had in his young life, and other Svarim as well, both in Jewish, both in Nigla, and both in Nister. The Ben Ish Chai Svarim was so mekabel that his great nephew, Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka was the Rosh Hashiva of Porat Yosef, together with Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka was also the great nephew of the Ben Ish Chai. His mother, Simcha, was the niece of the Ben Ish Chai. Now, in Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka's day, there was a famous story about a young child that seems that the Malach forgot to hit his lips. We all know that in the stomach of the mother, the Malach teaches the child Kol HaTorah Kula, Nigla, Nister, everything. And right before the child is supposed to be born, the Malach hits the child on the lips, and he forgets all the learning that he did. There was a child, and I did some investigation, that approximately, I think in the 60s, There was a child that was born without the dent on the lip. This child today is still alive. He lives in Kiryat Sanz, so I guess he's able to be made on the story. And the story goes that Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka heard that this little kid is able to quote Gemaras from beginning until the end. He was 4 years old. Not even, he was 3 years old. He was able to quote Midrashim, Zoya, Tikkunei Zoya, Bavli, Yerushalmi. And he said, I have to check this out myself. I can't, such a story like this, I can't rely on third parties. So he went to meet with this individual who still lives in Kiryat Sanz, and he started asking him questions. He quoted him a line in the Gemara, and this kid said, what do you want, the 3 blot before or the 3 blot after? So he said, you know what, I'll tell you everything. So he went ahead and he told him 7 blot, 3 blot before the line, 3 blot after the line, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos out missing a beat. Shulchan Aruch, Rishonim. And when it came to Achronim, it seems that not all the Achronim he mentioned. One of the Achronim, Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka said, was that he quoted the Ben Ish Chai from beginning till the end. He asked him all different questions on the Ben Ish Chai. Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka had the Sefer, and he said, Bapeh. Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka said the fact that this kid knows the Ben Ish Chai means that the Malach taught it to him. The Malach taught him. The Ben Ish Chai must be in Shemayim. This Sefer is Makol, because otherwise the Malach wouldn't taught it to him. So Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka said, you see from here that even in Shemayim, they're Mekabel the Sefer the Ben Ish Chai. So great was the Ben Ish Chai that his correspondence even reached Ukraine, even reached the Crimea, and even reached Lita. What happened was Mordechai Eliyahu, who was also a relative of the Ben Ish Chai, who's interestingly his father, Mordechai Eliyahu's father was an interesting individual. His father came from more of a traditional Iraqi family. They were very much involved in banking and trade. As we mentioned before, Baghdad was a major banking center and trade, especially with India, because India and Baghdad had a natural relationship, both being governed directly and indirectly from the British Empire. So they sent his father, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu's father, Rabbi Salmon Eliyahu, to England, to Cambridge and to Oxford to learn business, learn English, make connections with diplomats that would help the family business, and to carry on the family business into the next generation. And he went. He was an extremely bright kid and was extremely successful in England. Now, when Rabbi Salomon Eliyahu came back to Baghdad, somehow he ended up passing the famous yeshiva Beit Zilka. He went inside and was completely enthralled by the scene that he saw, so much so that he decided to stay and he decided to learn. And in a very short time, he became an accomplished Talmid Chacham in Nigla and in Nister in a very short time. However, his family was not happy about it. And his family put tremendous pressure on him to leave the yeshiva and to go into business. You were a capable individual, you're very smart, you made tremendous connections. Why are you giving it up? But Salomon Eliyahu, who was very close to the Ben Ish Chai, was a Talmud of the Ben Ish Chai, asked him, what should he do? He told him, pick yourself up and go to Eretz Yisrael. Now, for Reb Salomon Eliyahu, that was a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, because in Baghdad, he was very wealthy. He was very well connected. Everything was taken care of. In Eretz Yisrael, he was exceedingly poor. Very poor. So much so that Reb Mordechai Eliyahu would say that the mamish had no money to buy food. He would have to sell chickpeas to raise some money for the family that they should have food. Unfortunately, Reb Salomon Eliyahu died at a young age. And he wrote a tremendous sefer on Kabbalah called Kerem Shloima, half of it which was stolen by Arabs thinking that they could resell it, and it was never found again. But Mordechai Eliyahu, who not only was related to the Ben Ish Chai, also heard stories from the Zikanim of Iraq who came to Eretz Yisrael, especially as we mentioned before, the grandson of the Ben Ish Chai, said that when he once went to visit the Rav Shitzer Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, they were talking about the Ben Ish Chai, and the Rav Shitzer Rebbe told him, you should know that even in Belz in Ukraine, the Ben Ish Chai was recognized as Yochid B'Dorei. The story goes that when the first Belzer Rebbe passed away, they wrote on his kever Yochid B'Dorei. When the second Rebbe passed away, they did the same thing. When the third Belzer Rebbe passed away, they weren't sure what to do. His son said don't write Yachid B'Doiroi, because in today's generation there's only one Yachid B'Doiroi, and that is the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai was known throughout the world to be a tremendous Mekubal. He wrote an important classic sefer in introduction to the Eitz Chaim called Das Utfuna. He was such a great Mekubal and recognized that Rebbe Elyashiv's grandfather, the Leshem, everybody knows Rebbe Elyashiv, we all know that his grandfather was a great Mekubal who wrote the Sefer Lashem Shavoi V'Chalma. So great was the Leshem that the Chafetz Chaim himself would tell people, go see the Leshem now in this world, because in the next world you're not going to be able to see him, because he's going to be on a completely different area. That when he wrote the Sefer Leshem, who did he send it to? He sent it to the Ben Ish Chai to get his feedback. When the Ben Ish Chai wrote to him that he had tremendous hana and he learned tremendous from the Sefer, well, Elyashiv's grandfather said, Halavai, if I knew, I would have put more koiches into writing more svarim. If the Ben Ish Chai would have appreciated, if I would have known, he said, that the Ben Ish Chai would appreciate my svarim, he would have put more koiches into writing more svarim. Now, even though they had a little bit different Yisodis in Kabbalah, because the Lashem was Al Pi Derech the Goin, and the Ben Ish Chai was more Al Pi Derech HaRashash, but still they appreciated the tremendous godless in Kabbalah that they both had. Now, as we mentioned, the Ben Ish Chai's father left over significant amount of money, and his four brothers, Rav Moshe, Rabbi Cheskel, and Rabbi Nissen, they managed the business for Rabbi Yosef Chaim, and together they were very successful. Now, even though it seems that the Ben Ish Chai did not really have anything to do with the business other than being in documents, there are reports that the Ben Ish Chai, being the great rabbi and the center of all shilas in the Middle East, was acquainted with a lot of things that were going on in the world, and at times he advocated on the behalf of his family with the British consul, with the British ambassador, in order to help the family business. Unfortunately, it seems to be around the mid-1880s. It's not exactly sure if it was 1881 or 1885, the family's business collapsed. Not only did they suffer severe losses, they fell into terrible chayvus. It seems that the government suspected that they were doing something wrong, and it's not clear if they were malshin, somebody wanted to take revenge against them, but the government in Iraq arrested the entire Ben Ish Chai's family, including himself, because the Ben Ish Chai on the paper looked like the majority shareholder. He was the Bukhar, and he was a signatory on all the official government documents relating to the business. Now, as much as his brothers tried to explain to the government that the Ben Ish Chai had nothing to do with the business, they weren't interested. And they threw him again into a pit, and he had to be there for 30 days until certain members of the British community were able to impress upon the Iraqi government that not only the Ben Ish Chai was not guilty, had nothing to do with the business, and eventually the Ben Ish Chai's family were all released. Unfortunately, it caused tremendous tsar to his mother, who passed away within a short period of time after he was in prison. When the Ben Ish Chai was released, he sat down for some serious introspection. He said, there's no punishment without chait. Now, what chait could have the Ben Ish Chai done? Nobody knows. But however, he took upon himself something that's called Chuvas Hakona, after Rebbe Eliezer Hakona. This is based on the pasuk in Mishpatim, Shei Shanim Tavoid Uvashvi Yatzachavshi. So the Chuvas Hakona is that for 6 years you fast from morning till night. You only eat at night. You do other tikkunim, other different things, and in the 7th year you'll be free from the Yetzer Hara. It's brought down, and I heard from a few different sources that Rebbe Lapian also did this Chuvas Hakana. Rebbe Lapian, the famous mashgiach, who died in the late 70s, he also did this Chuvas Hakana. There are other tzaddikim I don't want to mention because I can't verify it, but a few that are still alive today that also is attributed that they did this Chuvas Hakana. The one of the most famous ones, I guess it's a little bit more Yidua, is Rav Dov Cook in Tveria, who fasts Kemat every day from morning till night. However, at this moment, for the next period of time, the Ben Ish Chai was completely, for the most part, secluded from the world. He was completely secluded from his family, except for the times that he had to be there, Shabbos and Yom Tovim, and the 4 drashas that he would give every year. Now, at that moment, at that time, it's reported that he learned every night with Eliyahu Hanavi. How do we know this? Because one time, the Shamash came to bring him food in his special room that he designated in the upper stories of his house. He had a special private room that, with the exception of his wife, nobody was allowed to enter, even his children, even his Talmidim were not allowed to enter. And there he would learn with Eliyahu Navi. Some say even during the day, some say even during at night. And one time when the Shamish came, he heard two voices in the room. And he said, oh, there must be a guest. Let me go back down and I'll prepare some food. So when the Rebbitzin of the Ben Ish Chai, Rebbitzin Rachel, said to him, why preparing 2 cups of coffee, 2 cups of tea, food? He said, I heard there was another person in the room, and therefore I want to bring food for them. She said, don't worry about it. There's nothing there. So what do you mean there's nothing there? I heard 2 voices. She looked at him and said, just bring food only for the Ben Ish Chai. Don't worry about it. His son, Rabbi Yaakov, reported that one of his Talmidim once tried to sneak into the room in the middle of the night, and before he went in, the Ben Ish Chai suddenly appeared to him and said, don't try to sneak into the room. You're not allowed to come in. Now, one of the famous stories that revealed the greatness of the Ben Ish Chai was when his great Rosh Hashiva passed away. His Rosh Hashiva, Rav Abdullah Sameach, passed away on Yud Ches Elul. At that time, there was a tremendous plague in Baghdad, and the governor and the ruler of Baghdad did not allow the Kehillah to bury Rav Abdullah Samech in the cemetery in Baghdad. They told him you have to go to the other side of the river and bury the Rosh Hashiva over there, which they had no choice, and they did. And they buried him next to Rabbi Shua Kohen Gadol, which was a very mechubedika place. And they figured if we can't bury him in Baghdad, at least let's bury him next to this great tzaddik. The problem is that the Goyim, the Arabs, the Muslims of Baghdad held that caver was not the caver of Yeshua Kohen Gadol, rather of a great sheikh, great prophet, and it was a bezoyin and an insult to Islam that they buried Rav Abdullah Sameach there, and they threatened tremendous penalties and tremendous tzaras on Klal Yisrael if they didn't remove the body of the Ben Ish Chai, of Abdullah Sameach. So the Ben Ish Chai was able to get a reprieve for 3 months until they can gather and bring Rav Abdullah Sameach to another place to be buried. Now, at the Levaya of Rav Abdullah Sameach, the Ben Ish Chai said there are certain tzaddikim that die once and they're buried twice. Why? It says in the pasuk, Yalzu Chasidim b'chavoid, Yeranenu mishkavoisam. He said the pasuk says Yalzu Chasidim, which is Lashon Rabbim, b'chavoid is Lashon Yochid, Yeranenu mishkavoisam. What does it mean mishkavoisam? Why is it 2 mishkavois? So that's when he said there's a tzaddik that sometimes dies once, is buried twice. Nobody knew what that meant. However, after the whole balagan, where the governor threatened the community of Baghdad unless they removed the body of Abdullah Sameach, the people began to understand that the Ben Ish Chai had Ruach HaKodesh. There was no way he could have known that this whole tumult would have happened. When they went to remove the body of the Rosh Hashiva, the governor sent a military escort to ensure that they took the body out and that the Yidden didn't say that they removed them, and they really didn't. When they opened the caver and to inspect that this was really the Rosh Hashiva, the Arab escorts, the Muslim security, they all fainted. Why? Because it looked like Rav Abdullah Sameach was buried in the ground not only a month ago, not only 3 months ago, but literally 2 minutes ago. What happened was he died in Yud Ches Elul. 3 months later, on Yud Ches Kislev, is when they took out the body. Now, that in and of itself is one thing. Not only was Baghdad a very hot area, since it was near the river, the ground is very moist. And if the ground is very moist, it causes the body to decay much faster. Yet, Rav Abdullah Sameach looked like he literally died a minute ago and was just buried. His body was clean, his face was clean, even the shrouds were clean as white. So much so that many of the Arabs at that time converted to Yiddishkeit. There's a story that there were Arabs, they ended up in Tzfas, and they learned by the Rav of Tzfas, and they told over this story how they became Gerim because of this Maisa. So at that moment, after they reinterred the Rosh Hashiva, the community came to the Ben Ish Chai and they asked him, what's Pshat? It doesn't make any sense. How could the Rosh Hashiva have such a tsar, such a bizayin like this? So the Ben Ish Chai said that in his Sefer Das Sunos, Shar HaGikulim, the Ben Ish Chai said, I brought a very interesting and puzzling statement from Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital said that the Arizal told him that the words Asher Chelev Zivachemoi, Asher Chelev Zivachemoi, which is in Dvarim, the Rosh Tevis Aleph Ches Zayin is the Rosh Tevis of Achaz, King Achaz, who was the father of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. We know that Achaz was a Rasha, his son Chizkiyahu was a tzaddik. That is hinted in these words, Asher Chelev Zivachemoi, and the Marchu says, I don't know what the Arizal wanted from me. So the Ben Ish Chai says, I'll explain to you what this means. The words Asher Chelev Zivachemoi is the Rosh Tevis of Achaz. But if you take the last two words, Chelev Zivachemoi, is Gematria 133. So Chelev is Ches is 8, Lamed is 30, Beis is 2, so you have 40. Then you take the word Zivachemoi and you add it up, it comes out together 133. So the last two words, Chelev Zivachemoi, is 133. It's the same Gematria as Abdullah. The Ben Ish Chai said that Abdullah was a Gilgul of Achaz. And just like Achaz, before he was buried, he had to be dragged. His son Chizkiyahu, we know, dragged the bones of Achaz through the streets. So too, Rav Abdullah Sameach, to get his final tikkun, had to be once again Kaviyachol dragged his body to his final resting place. The Ben Ish Chai added, just like Achaz stopped people from learning Torah, Rav Abdullah Sameach created a major Torah institution, a great yeshiva where from all of Torah in the Middle East sprang forth, the yeshiva of Beit Zilka, which even connected and lasted into the next generation, the Parat Yosef and all the great tzaddikim. They were all Talmidim of the great yeshiva of Beit Zilka, like we mentioned before, and this was the reason that this happened. How did the Ben Ish Chai know this? So the Ben Ish Chai's son and grandson said that the Ben Ish Chai had a famous sefer on Gilgulim. In it, it told all different secrets of how to know a person, which Gilgul he's from, which neshama he's related to, and what his tikkun is it. So much so that his son Rabbi Yaakov, the Ben Ish Chai's son Rabbi Yaakov, wanted to see what was written in the sefer. At one time during Shir, when he saw that his father really wasn't paying attention, who was coming, who was going, he snuck out to try to go to the room where the Ben Ish Chai hid the sefer to see what's inside it. Magically, or interestingly enough, before he got to the room, his father was there. And before he had a chance to ask his father, how did he get it so fast? His father said, don't go into the room to look at the sefer. You don't have permission yet to look at the sefer. We see from here that the Ben Ish Chai didn't need any cameras, and somehow he had kvitzas derech, knowing what his son wanted to do. After the 7 years, the Ben Ish Chai reached a level, as we mentioned, that was unparalleled in Kabbalah, in secrets of the Torah. Now, before we get to one of the most legendary stories of the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai's influence and contribution, even we feel not just in his farm today, but from the famous Maisa that he had with Rabbi Avram Yosef Shalom. Rabbi Avram Yosef Shalom was a wealthy Calcutta businessman who had a relationship with the Ben Ish Chai, and he sent him that he wants to do something for Klal Yisrael. What does the Ben Ish Chai advise him to do? Now, from the letter, it seems to be that the Ben Ish Chai understood that this Rabbi Avram Yosef Shalom wanted to build a state-of-the-art hospital in Eretz Yisrael. So the Ben Ish Chai wrote back to him and said, while building a hospital is a very important and noble thing, you could always raise money for a hospital. Everybody's willing to contribute money for a hospital. Nobody is willing, or very few people are willing to contribute money for a yeshiva, especially for a yeshiva that learns Kabbalah. If you listen to me, the Ben Ish Chai wrote, and you want an everlasting schus, build a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and that will be an everlasting schus for you and for your family. Especially, I want you to dedicate a special area where there be a group of Talmidei Chachamim learning Kabbalah from morning till night, because the Ben Ish Chai said that learning Kabbalah will bring and hasten the Mashiach. We know that the father of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Reb Chaim Leib Auerbach, started the yeshiva Shar HaShamayim from Mekubalim. How did he start this yeshiva with Reb Chaim Horowitz? The story goes that one night he had a dream, and in the dream, I don't remember who came to him. Now, again, this is not a Wunderlich Maisa. This is not a Maisa from 500 years ago. Reb Shlomo Zalman would repeat this story, and everybody knows the yeshiva Shar HaShamayim exists in Yerushalayim. Rav Yaakov Meir Shechter was a Rosh Yeshiva there, and in the dream he said that there's no one learning Kabbalah in a certain fashion, in a more dedicated fashion. And if you do that, you'll bring the Mashiach faster. So the next morning he met his friend, who was his Rebbe in Kabbalah. And before he had a chance to tell him his dream, his friend told him, I had this dream, what should we do? So funny enough, Reb Chaim Leib said, I also had the dream. So together, they started the yeshiva Sha'ar Shamayim, which is dedicated to learning Kabbalah from morning till night. And the Ben Ish Chai said the same thing. And that's what happened. So this Rebbe Avram Yosef Shalom sent money to build the yeshiva. And in honor of the Ben Ish Chai, he called it Parat Yosef. After the Ben Ish Chai, Parat Yosef, which was the main yeshiva, which brought forth all the great tzaddikim of the Sephardic community of the last generation. Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka, Reb Ezra Atiyah was the Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Ben Zion Abba Shaul, Reb Adi Yosef, Reb Mordechai Eliyahu, Reb Zion Levi. All the great tzaddikim came forth from Parat Yosef, and up until the War of Independence, they had a special room in the old city where they learned Kabbalah from morning till night. Rav Kaduri learned there. Eventually they moved. Eventually they came back. Until today, this yeshiva is a great yeshiva, all in the schos of the, obviously of Rabbi Avram Yosef Shalom, but because of the influence of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai, right before he passed away, went to the cave of Rabbi Cheskel Hanavi. It seems to be that he had a shaykhus with the neshama of Cheskel Hanavi, and he passed away. Now, when he passed away, he was buried, and his place became a major area for davening, naturally. Now, the grandson of the Ben Ish Chai, this Rabbi Yaakov, Reb David Chaim, who eventually became the Rav of Baghdad after his father Reb Yaakov, he said that in the 50s approximately, if I remember correctly, the government wanted to build a road through the cemetery. So they asked that they move the body of the Ben Ish Chai to a different place. They sent Arab workers to go there. When the Arab workers went, they all froze in place. So Reb David Chaim repeats that when he heard it, he brought a minion of people to this place. So he said the story over. So it's not like we're hearing the story, from 14th hand. He said the story over, that he davened to his grandfather, that please release the Arabs. They only want to do it for your kavod. They have respect for you, and we'll make sure that your body is removed respectfully. And after a whole day of davening, they were able to move. The Arabs were able to move, and they moved the body to another place. Now here's where it comes interesting. In the map, in the registry of the new cemetery, the new area where the Ben Ish Chai was buried, there's no mention, there's no ledger of the Ben Ish Chai's burial place. You can't find it. Some say that Reb David Chaim, the grandson, hid it, that people shouldn't know where he was buried, because it seems to be that a lot of the Arabs were trying to do disrespectful things to the caver. So even though, unfortunately, it would prevent people from davening there, he felt for the kavod of his grandfather was not proper. There is a Yid who says that he knows where the Ben Ish Chai is buried. He has a Messiah from his family, and he's trying to bring the caver to Eretz Yisrael. However, there were those that say that when they opened up the caver, there was no body there. And this was done late at night. Reb David Chaim knew that there was no body there. And the Ben Ish Chai is really buried in Har HaZeisim. What's the story? The great Ravam Ades, the grandfather of the great Mekubal, Rav Yaakov Ades, had a dream one night that the Ben Ish Chai's mita was being brought by Malachim and being buried in a place in Har HaZeisim. The next morning he went there and he saw a freshly dug grave, and they have now a matzeva there, the Ben Ish Chai. It says the story of Rav Ades testifying that the Ben Ish Chai is buried there. Rav Kaduri said that he's also buried there. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu said he's also buried there. Ben L'chaim, Rav Ben Yo Shmueli, the big Mekubal, said that he's also buried there. And so according to most accounts, miraculously the Ben Ish Chai is buried on Har HaZeisim. The Ben Ish Chai, as we mentioned, was nifter on Yud Gimel Elul, passing away 75 years old. His influence is felt today, both in his Svarim, both in the Yeshiva Parat Yosef, both in his Kabbalah Svarim, both in the stories that we heard from the great tzaddikim of the last generation, the great Tzidkus and Gadlus and Anivas of the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai who loved his community. And with that, we hope Zichroy Baruch, that he should be Me'os Yosef for all of us, Beklal Uprat, should be Megan and Klal Yisrael, and just like his entire being was connected to Eretz Yisrael, he should protect and be Me'os Yosef, then his chus Eretz Yisrael should be protected, and we should be Zaycha for Geula Shlema Amen Ken Yiratzon.